I'm gonna start with the sponsors, and then we'll pick up today's day. Okay. Sponsorships, A Year of Learning by Dr. Paul Koningsberg, in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Koningsberg, Shimon Ruven ben Labish, and Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nisan Hara Nisan ben Fardosa. Paula and Bob Bromberg, in memory of their dear friend Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malcolm Mann, and I have to say her Aleha Shalom now too. In memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust, Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Peres, Sarah Tova bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Avi Gitler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, Cheryl Sher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Arav Akiva. Marcia Fetterbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Uriel Paul Fetterbush, Uriel ben Harav Shimon, friends of Joe Wolf, Yosef ben Chaim. A Month of Learning by Adina and Michael Kirshner, in memory of their parents, Florence and Nathan Kirshner, and friend Harriet Friedman. Tova and Leo Zimmer, in memory of her mother, Henya bas Harav Berel, and her father, Aaron ben Yosef Mordechai. Perry and Jill Meltzer, in memory of his mother, Malka bas Baruch, and his sister, Golda Leah bas David Halevi. Carol and Josh Sanborn, in memory of her father, Yehoshua Shia ben Moshe Yehuda HaKohen. Stanley Presser, in memory of his mother, Leah bas Yehuda, his mother-in-law, Golda bas Avram, and his wife, Ruchel Mincha bas Moshe. Also, Ruth Burian and Judy and Edward Boehm, in memory of Ruth and Judy's mother, Hadassah bat Azriel Zelig Miriam, and her father, Yitzchak ben Yosef Esther. Also, A Week of Learning by Anne and David Klar, ending today, in memory of her mother, Gittel bas Yaakov. Also ending today, Sam and Ramona Levine and Charlie Gelfenstein. Week of Learning, in memory of Sam's mother and Charlie's mother-in-law, Livsha bat Avram Shammai, and Sam's father and Charlie's father-in-law, Yechiel Michal ben Arav Alexander Ziskin. Also, A Week of Learning by Harry and Myra Wild, in memory of his father, Shraga ben Yecheskel, by Mark and Catherine Linder, and starting today also, in memory of his father, Chaim ben Yecheskel Elimelech. Today also is a day of learning by Henry and Bonnie Stamen, in memory of his mother, Edel bas Yecheskel. And Shabbos, a day of learning by Susan and Richard Konst, in memory of their friend Joe Wolf, Yosef ben Chaim, as well as Milton and Tamar Fishberger, in memory of his mother, Sosha bat Moshe Halevi. May the Shamas have an Aliyah, Kranker Rafia, Velti Yashir, Sharma Talia, and L'chol B'nai Yisrael, a good Geben Shtiyar.
Amen.
Okay. All right. I don't see Marvin. I don't see Harvey. Oh, there's Harvey. Okay. Morning, everybody. Okay.
Morning, Rabbi.
Said that the Mishnah, the new Mishnah on Ayin Hay, Amud, the bottom of Amud Beis, dealt with the issue of what happened if the Korban Pesach came in contact with the earthenware stove or oven. Does that mean that the Korban Pesach was heated or roasted or cooked from that as opposed to directly on the fire? Okay. And what was the result of that? Okay. It then went on to indicate a number of other elements that Mishnah did in terms of use of basting on that Korban Pesach, whether it was oil from Truma, okay, or whether it was oil from Maaser Sheni. The Gemara then went on the bottom of Ayin Hey Amud Beis, okay, last line, to tell us that in regards to this discussion, okay, we have a number of principles, okay, cham letocham, okay, something hot going into something else hot, okay, and remember this is not just in regards to liquids, because yesterday we gave the example of making tea on Shabbos as a good example, okay, but you could have solids, okay, right? Piece of meat falling into a liquid, let's say falling into milk, right? Or milk dripping on meat, right? That would be example of a liquid and a solid. Or you could have solids connecting, right? So as we're dealing with this and we go on to the top of Ayin Vav, today's daf, we can see that it's giving us this whole list. Cham letocham, divrei hakol asur. Everybody in his agreement. Something hot touches something else that's hot, comes in contact, forbidden. Tzonein letoch tzonein, cold in contact with cold. Divrei hakol mutar. It's permitted. Now, here comes the more difficult items. Cham letoch tzonein, something hot in contact with something cold. V'tzonein letoch cham, or cold coming into contact with hot. Rav Amar Ilai Gavar, according to Rav, what's on top takes precedence. Ushmuel Amar Tata'ar Gavar, and Shmuel says what is on the bottom takes precedence, okay? And I told you already yesterday that we paskim like Shmuel, Tata Gavar, okay? Now picking up from there is where we left off to tell us another Mishnah teaches as follows, but it's really our same Mishnah that explains the next part of what was stated. Nataf mirotvo shel hacheres. If, let's call it gravy, splattered off the Korban Pesach, but it doesn't have to just be the Korban Pesach. It could be another piece of meat, okay? So gravy splatters off onto the earthenware oven. And then v'chazar elav, it then comes back onto the meat itself. What do we need to do, said the Mishnah? Yitol et mikomo. One removes that piece at that place. Gemara raises the question, kasal kadatach, I may have thought, becheres tzonenet. Does this imply that the oven, in other words, the earthenware oven was cold? So now the Gemara explains, Bishlem Rav, that would be acceptable. In other words, a natila, just taking a thin slice off, right? The Amar Ila Gavar, because he said the top item takes precedence. Mishum Hachi Itolet Mekomo. Because of that, therefore, all you have to do is slice off a piece at the place of contact. Da'azal, rotev, marteach, leilecheres. Because, and I'm doing this hopefully not too slow, but why? Because the gravy has left the source of origin, the meat or the Korban Pesach, okay, right? This hot gravy went and it first transferred to the earthenware oven. Vahadar cheres marteach leila rotev. And then whatever, I'll call it gravy, bounced off the cold earthenware oven, and then that went v'chihadar rotev apasach, and it then bounced back onto the korban pesach in this case. So it's hot to cold, and then cold back again to hot. Okay? Ka matvei pesach. Okay? And so therefore, in roasting the korban pesach, mechamat chamimuta decheres. Therefore, it is becoming warmed, I'll say, from the heat of the earthenware oven. V'rachmana amar tzli esh. And the Torah says it must be fire, roasted by fire. V'lo tzli mechamat davar acher. And not, therefore, roasted from some other source. Okay? So that's why for Rava, okay, for Rav, it's sufficient simply to cut off, okay, slice off a piece on top where that, where that rotiv landed. Ela l'Shmuel. But regarding Shmuel's view, the Amarta ta'agavar, that says what is at the bottom takes precedence. In other words, in our example now, the hot korban pesach, right? Cheres kevan ditzonenhu, the earthenware oven, since it's cold, ikuri mekar le lerotev. It should be cooling off this gravy. Amay yatil et mikomo. Why then do we, I'm going to put in the word simply, slice off a piece from the place of contact? Ked'amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, as was said by Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Shmuel, in the name of Shmuel, and Bisolet Rotachat, okay, with regards to, okay, hot flour. Hachanami, here too, Becheres Roteach. We're talking about earthenware oven that is still hot. And so therefore, we have a problem. If that's the case, it means hot to hot, and it should be forbidden according to Shmuel, and not simply cut off a piece. Now, Tznan, we've got another Mishnah that teaches as follows. Nataf mirodvo al hasolet. In other words, here's the example of that issue of the flour. If the gravy, okay, overflowed, burst out onto the flour, okay, yikmotz et mikomo. We said there, according to our Mishnah, again, you have to take a handful and remove it. Kasal keda'atach. Perhaps you may have been of the opinion, besolet tzonenet, that we're talking about the flour being cold. Bishlema l'Rav. Again, that would seem acceptable to Rav. The Amar ila agavar, because he says that what is on top takes precedence. Mishum hachi yikmotz et mikomo. Because of that, then we can say you simply remove what's on top where the contact occurred. Take a handful and remove it of the flour. Demarteach la lesolet, because it heats up that area of the flour. The hadar hodarne, that afterwards it comes back. Vahadra solet, and then comes the warm flour, the hot flour. Umitarcha le ledidei, and it heats up that which was part of it. Okay? V'kamat ve'rotev michamat chamimuta desolet. And then it roasts, so to speak, that gravy roasts from the heat of the flour and not from the original source. V'rachmana amar, and again, according to the Torah, we say, tzli esh. It's got to be heated by direct fire. V'lo tzli mechamat davar acher, and not heated from another source. Ela l'Shmuel. Rather, however, for Shmuel, the Amar Ta'agavar, who says what's below, the beneath, takes precedence. Solet kevandit sonenati, that flour, since it was cold, ikuri kam mikrele, it should cool off that gravy. Lama li yikmotz et mikomo. Why then should we say it's sufficient simply to remove, right? Take a handful of the flour and remove it. Tiske, all right? It should be enough, like bitul et mikomo, simply to nullify that amount. Therefore, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Shmuel, that's where Rabbi Yirmiyah gave the statement in the name of Shmuel, Besolet rotachat, it must have been with flour that was hot and not cold flour. Right? So it didn't cool it off, again became hot to hot, and should have been forbidden. Now, another Mishnah, Tznan, teaches as follows. Back again to our same Mishnah, really. Sachu b'shemen shel truma. We said they basted the Korban Pesach with oil that was truma oil. Im chavurat kohanim yochelu. If it is a group of registered kohanim together eating, they may eat it. Im shel Yisrael. If, however, it's a group of Israelites, im chai, okay, if it occurs, all right, and the meat is still raw, yedichena, one should wash off the oil. Im tzlihu, okay, if it's been basted, well, it's roasted, right? Yiklof et hachitzon, okay. What happens? He must cut off an entire outer area. Okay. Bish Rav. Again, we say this is acceptable according to the view of Rav. The Amar ila agavar, because we say Rav holds what's tops takes precedence. Amtu lahachi sagi le beklipa. Okay. As a result, we say here, again, that it would seem the result being that it would be enough then to do klipa. Mishum de'ilat sonenhu. Why? Because then the top part, okay, would have been cold. Ela l'Shmuel. But in regarding Shmuel, the Amar Ta'agavar, that we say that the bottom item takes precedence. Kevan dechamhu, since it's warm, mivalea bale, it's going to absorb. Amai sagi le beklipa. Why then would it be sufficient simply to slice off an entire section? Nistar legamre. Shouldn't we then forbid it completely? So the Gemara now tells us, Shani Sicha, with regards to the basting, it's different. The Mashahu Ba'almahu Da'avida, okay, that there's only some mashu, some small amount, okay, that's used. And so therefore there really isn't enough to be absorbed by the meat, even when it's hot. Now, got the following Braita. Tanya Kavate de Shmuel. The following was taught according to Shmuel. Okay? Cham letocham, when it's hot in contact with hot, into hot, asur, forbidden. V'chein sonein shenatan letocham asur. And likewise, cold into hot, okay, is also forbidden. Cham letoch tzonein, hot into cold, v'tzonein letoch tzonein, and cold into cold, madiach, needs to be rinsed. Cham letoch tzonein madiach, asks the Gemara, hot into cold needs to be rinsed. Kevan dechamu, okay, since it's hot, asks the Gemara, adame karle, okay, is it going up to what point does it cool it off, so to speak? Efshar delo bale porta. It's since we said that the bottom absorbs, right? The bottom is hot, okay? But in this case, if it's hot on top and cold on the bottom, asks the Gemara, isn't it possible, really, that wouldn't it absorb at least some small amount, right? Klipa miha nebaye, and therefore at least cutting a whole piece off, isn't that at least minimally necessary? Ela ema, but rather I would say as follows. In other words, he's in a sense rewording the Braita. Cham letoch tzonein kolef. Hot going into cold, one needs to cut off a piece. Tzonein letoch tzonein, cold into cold, madiach, that we rinse. Now another Braita, Tanya idach. This other Braita says, basar roteach. Say we have hot meat, shenafal letoch chalav roteach, and it fell into hot milk. Okay, v'chein tzonein, and likewise cold. And here we have to understand it as cold meat, shenafal letocham, that fell into hot milk, asur. Cham letoch tzonein, hot into cold, v'tzonein letoch tzonein, or cold into cold, madiach, we rinse. So the Gemara then again raises a question. Cham letoch tzonein madiach, hot into cold, we rinse. Kevan dechamhu, okay, since it's hot, adam mekarle, up to what point does it get cooled off? Efshar delo bale importa. It's impossible that it didn't absorb at least some. Klipa miha nibaye. Cutting off a top piece completely, that's minimally necessary. Again, we're going to reword the Braita. Ela ema, but rather I would say it this way. Cham letoch tzonein, hot into cold, kolef. We remove, okay, a whole piece. Tzonein letoch tzonein, cold into cold, madiach. Okay, we rinse. Now, amar mar, but the master said, tzonein letoch tzonein madiach. Cold into cold, we rinse. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna clarifies, lo shanu ela shelo malchu. They only said this or taught this in regards to a situation where it did not get salted. Aval malchu, if it was salted, asur, then it's forbidden. The Amar Shmuel, because Shmuel also, I'm going to say, indicated the following: Maliach harehu kiroteach. Okay, salting an item is equivalent as if it is boiling, hot, cooking. Right? Kavush harehu kimavushal. Pickling is the same again as if it is cooking, right? And this again is a important principle in terms of general kashrut rulings, right? Now, Amar Rava. Rava responds and says as follows: Had Amar Shmuel, where Shmuel said this, Maleach harehu karoteach v'chuli, this statement, this principle, all right? Lo amran ela shelo ne'echal michamat malcho. We're talking about something that can't be eaten because of the degree of saltiness. Aval ne'echal michamat malcho. But if the item can be eaten, right, regardless of how salty it is, no, it doesn't apply. Now, Gemara picks up and gives us a following with a story. Hahu bar guzla. There was this particular young bird. Okay, here's your meat. The nafal lekada de chamcha, and it fell into a container, let's say, of kamcha. Kamcha is a kind of kutach. Okay, and remember, kutach was made with milk. Right? So again, it's meat falling into milk. What happened? Sharya Rav Chinana Berei de Rava Mipashronia. And it was permitted, in other words, to eat, okay, by Rav Chinana, the son of Rava of Parshronia. Now, Amar Rava, okay, and this is Rava, however, not the same Rava of Parshronia, said as follows in response to his being makil on this situation. Man chachin lemishra milta kiha. Okay, it can only be someone who is smart, wise enough to permit this kind of thing, as in this example. Ilav Rav Chinana Berei de Rava Mipashronia. Someone of the caliber, let's say, of Rav Chinana, the son of Rava Pashrona. The Gavra Ravahu, because he is a great person, great man. Amar lach, now, ki amar Shmuel, because when Shmuel said this, Maliach harehu kiroteach, that it was, when it's salted, it's like being cooked, okay, being heated, right? She'ein ne'echal michamat malcho, that it's only when it can't be eaten because of its level of saltiness. Hai ne'echal michamat malcho. And in this situation, okay, that we just had, it may be eaten despite its saltiness. V'hani mili chai, okay? And in this situation, it's when it was raw. Aval tzli, but if it were a situation where it was roasted, by klipa, it would need cutting off. V'lo amran ela del'it be pili. And we said this, even then, only when regards there were cracks. Aval it be, that there were no cracks. Okay? Aval it be pile, but if there were cracks, in other words, the potential to absorb, asur, it would be forbidden. Ve'imi, right? Metuval betavle, and if then this food stuff had been dipped in spices, asur, then it would be forbidden. Okay? So we see this, at this point, we see that while the principle of Maliach Kiroteach, okay, applied, can be applied, okay, and Kavush Kimavushal, there is still some definite limits as to its application, okay? Now, Gemara wants to have us continue as we go on to Amud Beis. Okay, Amar Rav. Rav says as follows. Okay, with another example, a different case. Basar shchuta shamen. Say we have kosher meat, okay, that has been slaughtered appropriately, and it's fatty meat. And what happened? Shetzla'o im basar nevela kachush. And for some reason, it got roasted at the same time that nevela meat, okay, which was lean, also was roasted. Asur, that meat, okay, the kosher meat then is forbidden. Ma'itama, what's the reasoning? Mefat me mahadade, okay, because we say here that in this case, all right, the flavor is going to spread. Now, V'levi amar, Levi, however, goes ahead and says as follows: Afilu basar shchuta kachush. Even, he said, if it is kosher lean meat, shetzalu im basar nevela shamen, and it got roasted with nevela meat that was fatty, mutar, then it would be permitted. Ma'itama, what would be the reasoning? Recha ba'almahu, because then we're only dealing with the odor. And in general, what do we say about the odor? V'recha lav miltahi, and the odor is not significant. Now, avid lo uvda, and not only that, but Levi actually carried it out with a real deed. Namely, he did the following act, Bereish Galuta, at the house of the Reish Galuta. What did he do? Big day, okay? Begedi v'davar acher. Namely, what did he do? He actually roasted a gedi, a goat, and something else. What's the something else? The Mefarshim suggest it was pig. Okay. Now, meitive, but we have a challenge to this statement of Levi by another Braita. Ein tzolin shnei psachim ke'achad, that we do not roast two korban pesachs, let's say, at the same time, mepnei hata'arovet, because they might get mixed up. Now the Gemara has a question here. Ma'i lav ta'arovet ta'amim? Aren't we then talking about mixing of their tastes? In other words, say one used a gedi and one used a keves, okay, a lamb and a goat, okay? Aren't they going to have then tastes different, and you're mixing the tastes? V'kasha leLevi, and this seems to be a problem for Levi's view if you say that Recha Lav Milta. Okay? Lo, no, says the Gemara. Mepnei ta'arovet gufi, because you might mix up the bodies of the animals themselves. In other words, each chavura may get the wrong korban pesach. Hachinami mistabra. And this does seem logical, this explanation. Midikatani sefer, because it was taught at the end, afilu gediva tle, even in a situation where we have a gedi and a taleh, a lamb and a goat. I amart bishlema mepnei gufi. If you're going to say that we apply this in terms of the bodies of the animals itself. Hainu dikatani afilu gediv tle. This is why then our Mishnah teaches, even in the example of a young goat and a young lamb, right? Ela'i amrat mipnei ta'arova ta'amim. If you're going to say our concern is about mixing the tastes, mali gedi utle, then why does our Mishnah specifically give us the example that it did of the gedi and tle? Mali gedi, gedi. Okay, what about the example of one goat and another goat? Elamai, but what rather is it? Al korchech, against your will, then we have to argue mipnei ta'arovet gufin hu da'asur. Why? Because we say that the mixing of the actual items, the bodies of the two korbanei Pesach, that would be forbidden. Aval ta'arovet ta'amim shari, but the mixture of any kind of tastes was permitted. So the Gemara says, Lema tiyu tiyuvte derav. So that would therefore seem to be a proof text against what Rav was saying. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, as Rabbi Yirmiyah tells us, Hacha b'mayas kina. What are we talking about? Excuse me, what are we dealing with? Kegon shetzla'o b'shtei kederot. That's as if they roasted it in two pots. Okay? So Gemara says, wait a second. B'shtei kederot salgadatach. In two pots you're trying to compare it to? Ela ema. But rather say it, I would say it this way. Ke'ein shtei kederot. It's as if they were roasted separately, the same way one would roast two items in separate pots. Vahachi ka'amar. And this is how we need to say it. Ein solin shnei psachim ke'echad mipnei ta'arovet. We do not roast two animals as korban pesach at the same time because of mixtures. Mai ta'arovet, what do we mean by mixture? Ta'arovet ta'amim, the mixture of their tastes. Va'afilu ke'ein shtei kederot. And even when it's as if they are like two separate pots. Deleka ta'arovet ta'amim, because we do not hold in regards to a mixture of tastes, asur, that it's forbidden, mishum ta'arovet gufin, because of a concern of mixture of the bodies themselves. Va'afilu gedi utle. And even in the example of two animals like a gedi and a tle. Now, Amar Rav Meri. Rav Meri, however, is now going to give us a new statement. Okay? And he tells us, Kitnai. This seems to be a machloket tanaim, as in the following example. Harodeh pat chama, one who removes hot bread, okay, hot loaf from the oven. V'natna al pi chavit yayin shel truma, and he places the hot loaf of bread on top of a keg of truma wine. Rabbi Meir oser. Rabbi Meir says it's forbidden, namely the bread. But Rabbi Yehuda matir, and Rabbi Yehuda permits it. Now, what's the implication? The Rabbi Yassi, however, gives another opinion. Matir b'shel chitin. He will permit the bread if it's made from wheat. V'oser b'shel se'orim. But he will forbid the bread if it's made from barley. mepnei shehasa'orin sho'avot, because barley bread has a tendency to absorb. In other words, it could possibly be that bread will absorb the odor of the truma wine. Okay. Now, do we therefore say that reicha lav miltahi, like Levi, that the odor is not significant? Or do we not hold like that? My lav tna'aihi, isn't this therefore not a machloket tanaim? Demar savar reicha lav miltahi, that one master holds that the odor is not significant. Umar savar reicha miltahi, and another master holds that odor is significant. Levi vadai tna'aihi. For Levi, this certainly seems to be a machloket tanaim. L'Rav nema tna'aihi. According to Rav, shall we say it's a machloket tanaim? Amar lach Rav. Rav would argue back and say as follows: the kuli alma reicha miltahi, that according to everybody, odor it can be something significant. Now, lav itmar Allah dahahi, and wasn't it said about this the following? Amar Rabba bar Chana, Amar Reish Lakish. Rabba bar Chana said in the name of Reish Lakish, Bepat Chama v'chavit petucha, when it is hot bread, a hot loaf, and it's put on top of the keg where there is an opening in the keg. In other words, right, there's no stopper closing the opening to the keg. Okay, and it's truma wine. Divrei hakol asur. According to everyone, that bread is forbidden. Bepat sonenet, if the bread is cold, v'chavit megufa, and the keg is closed, sealed, divrei hakol mutar, then the bread is permitted. Lo nechlaku ela bepat chama v'chavit chatuma. They only disagreed where the bread was hot and the keg was sealed, or pat sonenet, where the bread was cold, v'chavit petucha, and the keg was open. Vahanami, and here, in other words, in our case, right, where we have our example of the two Pesach offerings, right, that was our case. Nami kipat chama v'chavit petucha damya, suggesting that is similar to the situation of the warm bread, the hot bread, and an open keg. It's similar to that. Okay, implying that if you hold reicha miltahi, the odor, right, the taste of one will be absorbed by the other. Now, Tani Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana, however, teaches the following. Berei de Rav Chinana, Saba, the son of Rav Chinana the elder, Pat she'af'a im tzli betanor. This following situation where bread has been baked, okay, with something roasted in the same oven, okay? So the question is, if you've got roasted meat in the oven and bread, and it's possible, if you hold, okay, that reicha miltahi, like Rav does, therefore the bread is absorbed the odor, the taste of the meat. If you hold like Levi, it did not absorb it. Nevertheless,
like OU Dairy, right? Way ahead of the time.
Yeah. Okay, so what is Rav Kahana telling us? In this case, Pache afa im tzli betanur, this bread that has been baked in the same oven with roasted meat, asur la'achla bekutcha. It is forbidden to eat it with kutach, with something dairy. Okay, remember kutach we said was this porridge or this gruel or whatever, right? Hahi, okay, we say this, however, binita deitva bahade bisra asra. Okay, we say that it's in this case also, okay, that when we have fish, binita deitvaha, that was roasted, bahade bisra, with this meat, asra, it's also forbidden. Now, what happens? Rabba mi parzika lemichla bekutcha. Okay. However, Rava from Parzika would permit eating that, okay, with milk. Okay. So he would say that that fish, okay, did not, maybe he holds that Brecha lav milta, and as a result, that you could eat that fish roast that was cooked, roasted at the same time with meat. You could eat that fish with kutach. Now, let's go on and pick up as we finish this part of the sugya. Mar bar Rav Ashi Amar, afilu b'milcha nami asura. He says, even in a situation where it's been salted, it's also forbidden. Mishum dekasha l'recha l'divrei hakol. Okay, why? He says, because in this case, okay, the odors, all right, are such, okay, that it's going to cause physical harm, let's say, to the person, okay, such as bad breath and ledavar acher, and it's also going to cause something else, namely stomach issues. Right? So in other words, we see here that even though sometimes there were, it's not what I would call for the moment a kashrut problem, there was what the rabbis perceived as a hygienic issue, okay, and forbade certain food combinations. Okay, now, having finished that sugya, we get to a new Mishnah, okay? Now, our new Mishnah, in a sense, is still dealing with what I'll call in general aspects of kashrut. Okay? Chamisha dvarim ba'im betum'ah, ve'enan ne'echalim betum'ah. Okay? What are we talking about? Okay, there are 5 things, says this Mishnah, okay, where if we're going to bring them as offerings, they may be brought in a status of being tameh, but they're not to be eaten in a status of tumah. And what are they? Number 1, ha'omer. One is the omer, that first grain, shtei halechem. The second is the 2 loaves associated with Shavuot. The third is velechem hapanim, the Shabbos showbread. Okay, and the next is right, v'zivchei shalmei tzibur, right, the offerings that are the shlamim of the community. And the last one, the next is V'si'irei Rosh Chodashim, the animals that are brought, right, for Rosh Chodesh offerings. And then, says the Gemara, the Mishnah, HaPesach Sheba B'Tumah, and then we also say that the Korban Pesach, okay, and this is why, how we get to it finally, to our connection, okay, that is brought in a status of being Tuma, Ne'echal B'Tumah. It may be eaten in a status of Tuma, Shelo ba mitchilato ela la'achila, because the whole purpose, if you will, of bringing the Korban Pesach is ultimately for its consumption. Now, Gemara picks up. Chamisha lema'ute mai. You listed 5 things. What did it come to exclude? Lema'ute chagigat chamisha asar. It comes to eliminate, okay, the chagiga of the 15th, okay, 15th of Nisan. T'salka da'ata chamina, because it may be that you thought of the impression I might think as follows. Kevan de korban siborhu, since that is also considered a communal offering, ukavi'ah le'moed, and it is identified, fixed by a certain date, okay? Tadchei Tumah. It should also, therefore, push off any issue of Tumah. Kamashmala comes to teach us, Kevan de itle tashlumin kol shiva. Since we see that it is possible, okay, as in the example of Sukkot, that it could be brought any of the other days, and therefore we could have that be the case and satisfy the requirement of bringing that kind of korban, chagiga, for the rejoicing of the holiday. Lo dachya Shabbat. It does not put off Shabbat. In other words, so if the first day, let's say of Sukkot, was also Yom Tov and Shabbat together, we would not bring the Korban Chagiga that day, and therefore bring it the next day, or the same might be the example with Pesach. Umi de Shabbat lo dechia, and since it doesn't put off Shabbat, lo dechia tuma, it also doesn't put off any status of tuma. V'nitnei nami seirei harigalim. So why don't we teach the same thing in regards to the other offerings associated with the holidays? Hatanale zivchei shomei tzibur. Here we taught it as the offerings of shlomim for communal offerings. V'ihachi, and if that's the case, right? Seirei roshei chodeshim nami lo nitne. Then why also then did we teach? Why also then do we teach this in regards to the seirim that are offered on Rosh Chodesh? Here too, maybe we shouldn't have included teaching that. Dahatana zivchei shalmei tzibur, because here we've taught again in regards to the fact that they are communal offerings as well. Amrei, and therefore we'll go over just a little bit. Okay, so what do we say? Seirei Rosh Chodesh, Roshei Chodeshim, Itztarichali. But we needed to include the Seirim of Rosh Chodesh. Why? Salka da'at amina, because it's possible I might have believed to say, Halo kativ bahomoid, that maybe there's no explicit clarification of what the appointed time is. Kamash Malan comes to teach us the Rosh Chodesh Ikre Moed, that Rosh Chodesh is considered an appointed time, Kida Abai, as Abai says, the Amar Abai, who says the following: Tammuz, the Hai Shata, Melave, Melaveya, okay, that in Tammuz of a particular year, okay, that it can come out as fall. Dichtiv, as it's written, right? Kara alai moed lishbor bachurai. Okay? In other words, citing a pasuk that tells us that Rosh Chodesh is an appointed time, okay? And that therefore, the question is, does that tell us that it's going to be doche tuma or not? So and the Gemara picks up, which will pick up tomorrow, the Memra dekulhu mimoed. Okay, again, asking this question. Okay, what do we mean when we say that it is an appointed time? Does that therefore remove it from the status of being a korban that's doche Shabbat and doche tuma or not? That's where we'll stop for today. Okay. So everybody have a good Shabbos.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom. Be well. Appreciate